Let's just do it. This next panel is going to be very exciting, so everyone should definitely find a seat. We are going to talk with women cannabis entrepreneurs. My name is Arielle Clarke. I am a cannabis business and corporate attorney. I am a founder of Clarke Newbert LLP, a women-owned and run law firm. And I'm a longtime policy reform advocate. I am incredibly honored to be up here today talking with these brilliant and distinguished women. And we're going to talk about some really cool things today, including what they're doing in this space, what they're doing in life. And so we're going to start out with an introductory question. Oh, pardon me. The microphone got really excited too. I'd like to start on my left, and I'd like each woman to introduce themselves and tell us who you are, what you do in cannabis, what you do kind of in the industry and your role. But the lead prompt question that I'd like each of you to answer is this. For folks like us who've been in cannabis a long time, a lot of people ask us, why did you choose cannabis? Why are you in cannabis? So I'd like to switch the question around. And the question I'd like you ladies to answer is, why did cannabis choose you? Why did this knowing female healing plant choose you? What is it about your character, your expertise, about who you are, that she chose you in ways to be of service to her? So, shall we begin?
Okay. Hi, my name's Madison Margolin. I'm features editor at Civilized, which is a cannabis lifestyle publication. My publisher, Derek, is right here in the audience. I've been writing about cannabis for about, almost 4 or 5 years now, freelancing for publications like Vice, Playboy, Rolling Stone, High Times, a lot of them. And on the side, I also write about psychedelics as well with a new publication called Double Blind. And I'm going to introduce my sister, who's on her way. We're not the most prompt family. Allison is a criminal defense and now licensing attorney who does cannabis law. And I guess the reason we're both in cannabis, I'll just speak for her, because that's what you get for being late. We kind of grew up in a cannabis family. I don't really know if we chose cannabis at all. I kind of fell into it by accident. I told myself I wasn't going to do anything weed related and ended up in journal. My father is also a cannabis lawyer. Allison's a lawyer, does cannabis law. And I was like, I don't want to do weed law. That's their thing. And in journalism school, I decided to write a story about cannabis in New York, and just sold that story and ended up writing about cannabis for the Village Voice and then freelancing about it. And here I am now writing with weed being my life, and I guess that was my destiny. As for Allison, she loves weed, and marijuana is a family value, and I guess we both, her from an advocacy perspective and a legal perspective, and me from sort of really just growing up in the cannabis space and the industry. I think both of us have a really unique perspective on how the industry has grown up in the past more than 20 years. And we're able to sort of, I guess, speak to the different aspects of the industry. Allison working with growers and dispensary people, and me being a journalist, getting to interview people from all over every sector of the industry. I'm here to tell the story of the cannabis plant, so I hope that says it.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Amanda.
Hi, I'm Amanda Chicago Lewis. I'm also a journalist. I write a column about cannabis for the magazine Rolling Stone. I also do stuff for a bunch of other publications like GQ and Wired and the Wall Street Journal, etc. I've been covering cannabis primarily for the past 5 or 6 years. I am 32. I was always a person who was sort of drawn to cannabis over alcohol. It was something I always felt really comfortable with. And then I also have always really been someone who understands everyone's side of a story or an argument. So I was like that kid in middle school and high school who like listened to both friends that were fighting and was like, yeah, I totally see what you're saying. But like they were against each other and had totally opposite points of view. And so I parlayed that into journalism, where I also, I think I'm someone who's able to move within a lot of different types of spaces, and at this point, cannabis encompasses so many different types of people and worlds, from really well-funded corporations to growers in the backwoods to scrappy entrepreneurs to social justice things to, financial deals, and it really touches a lot, from medicine to science to policy to business, et cetera. So I, even though cannabis sounds like a very limited thing to write about, I feel comfortable talking in depth about like that sort of wide variety of subjects, which I think is why it makes sense for cannabis to have chosen me. And as a person who tries to generally represent, what the average pothead might think if they were really informed about what was going on about marijuana legalization. I just try to understand what's going on from everyone's perspective and then collate it into a narrative that people who aren't spending a lot of time paying attention to the space will understand. So that's what's going on with me.
Thank you. Please.
Hello, my name is Sandra Carrillo. I am a medical doctor, a physician. I studied medicine in Colombia. I was born there, and I live actually in Panama. I work in ER for many years, and then I did a master's in aesthetic medicine and anti-aging medicine in Spain. And the last few years, I got very interested in cannabis medicine. For me, it's been like a huge change, because I've been all my life. I was raised in Colombia, and in Colombia, it's a big stigma with cannabis and cannabis users. And as a doctor, I used to be a person who was against cannabis consumers, because everybody who used cannabis used to be like being in a very bad way. But right now in Panama, I work with a foundation. We help children with epilepsy, and everything started since I started seeing these children. This is a story of a little girl. She used to have 400 seizures a day. The diagnostic she had, it was a Ohtahara syndrome, very rare disease. And in Panama, cannabis is not legal, so the mother had to fly to the States and bring the daughter to get treated here. And then she started using Charlotte's Web. And now this little girl has a different life. The family has a different life, and it's been 2 years since she's seizures free. So this is a huge inspiration and motivation, and makes me study. And I've been going all over the world learning, in Europe, Israel, United States, Latin America. And I consider myself like one of the biggest advocates in Panama. I've been working with the government trying to legalize medical cannabis. Still not legal, but I think we're getting there. By the end of this year, probably we will have the law. I also work in Colombia. I have practice in there, since in Colombia is legal. I work with patients. I have clinics where I treat patients with very little economic resources. So basically right now my biggest passion is to help people through this superior medicine that is cannabis. And my biggest challenge right now that I was telling you is that I do see the medical community is still not too open. I love here in the States when I see doctors that they are aware, that they want to learn. And in Latin America, we still need to remove the stigma. So I want to create educational programs. So because I think the doctors are one of the main links, because if the doctors are educated, they can help the patients, treat them, and give them confidence in how to use this amazing plant that Mother Earth is giving us to heal the world. So that's basically what I've been doing the last years.
Thank you so much. Felicia.
Hello, my name is Felicia Carbajal. I am the director of the Social Impact Center. I'm also one of the founding members of Equity First Alliance. I'm also the chair of Equity First Coalition. I've worn many hats surrounding the cannabis conversation in particular. One thing I do want to do is acknowledge that today is Harvey Milk's birthday. So as a queer person of color, I'm afforded this privilege in particular because of amazing individuals. It kind of segues into not my why, but the calling, because I think that's what the question really amounts to. So for me in particular, I got a few callings. So the first one started when I was 19 years old, when one of my friends asked me to illegally transport cannabis from Berkeley to San Francisco. No brainer. I did a lot of that, including a lot of trafficking all across this country based on the idea of compassion. After I was done being incarcerated, and a little afraid of this conversation in particular, I was fortunate enough to meet Dr. Alan Frankel, who afforded me an amazing opportunity to look at cannabis through a different lens in particular, through not just an academic lens, but through the science lens and through helping people again. So it allowed me and afforded me an opportunity to be grounded in compassion once again. So today, as a person who's pushing the conversation of social equity, I believe that I'm grounded in compassion once again. Compassion for communities of color that have been impacted by the war on drugs, like the community I grew up in particular. So she called me because I could take it.
Thank you. So, Felicia, actually, I'd love to start with you. You are working in one of the most challenging and dynamic jurisdictions, which is the city of LA. And some of your main priorities are really community reinvestment and social responsibility. And I'm curious if you can share with us sort of what do the nuts and bolts of that look like, and what does implementation look like to you?
So in terms of some of the big things that we've been lobbying for in the city of Los Angeles in particular is to ensure that those tax revenues actually go back into communities that have been impacted. So we've been having these difficult conversations about what does corporate social responsibility look like in the cannabis industry? What does it look like to go back and heal those harms in particular? So in the city of Los Angeles, it's been a mixed bag, but we know that they know we're here. They know that in terms of not just me, but our coalition as a whole, we've set a lot of fires. And in doing some of those fires in particular, we've seen the city make small budgets. So we've got the city of Los Angeles to allocate $3 million over the course of the next 3 years, which was unheard of. Although I'd like to also share that's still only about 4% of the actual tax dollars that have been accumulated by the city of Los Angeles. So we're taking those 2 steps forward and going 1 step back. In terms of what do we need more champions. Right now, we've been very fortunate. I also got to work in politics during the Prop 8 movement. I was one of the leaders who worked during the marriage equality movement, so I got to make a lot of interesting friends, and one of them happens to be Council Member Mike Bonin. We've been able to challenge him in particular as a white gay guy from the West Side who's raising a young black child who's going to be a black man in this country to really open his mind and be a little bit more bold. So right now we just need bold, fearless leadership in the city of Los Angeles to actually ensure that not just funding happens, but that social equity, there's some teeth behind it, that we actually have something that's not just a licensing infrastructure and a Trojan horse to capture a regulated marketplace.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Amanda, I'd actually like to ask you a question, sort of bouncing off of Felicia's discussion. You, by the way, I have I have immense respect for every woman on this panel, but we all thank you so much for what an incredible journalist that you have been, and such an amazing, really, leader with your pen or typing in this space. And I'm curious, So there's a lot we can learn in the cannabis space from other industries or maybe other civil rights movements. But maybe you could speak to what can we learn today in this industry that we've seen in other civil rights or other social change movements that may help us, that's most present in this moment with the challenges that we're facing?
Whew. Well, thank you for the compliment and for a huge question. I think it's really hard to answer that because it's almost difficult to compare cannabis with other social change movements because very few of them have led to a explosion of an industry. I mean, one thing that's become really complicated around cannabis is that it started as a movement and now it's become an industry, and it sort of has one foot in either category, and there's a lot of posturing on the side of industry to make it seem like they care about not only social equity and the communities of color that were disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, but small farmers that have been making their living off of cannabis for a long time in the half illicit market or in the totally illicit market. And so there's a lot of gestures toward helping the social problems that were created by prohibition, but in reality not a lot of attention paid to them. So I think in terms of trying to look at other movements and seeing what cannabis could take from them, I think the most that we could say is sort of a normalization and an attempt to capture and change what people think through mass media narratives, whether that's the kind of magazine stories that I do or movies or TV. I mean, obviously, I think we all understand that ultimately Will and Grace had one of the biggest effects on how gay marriage and queer people are seen in the United States, and the narratives that are put out now through YouTube are massively changing the way that young people see what America could be. So I think that unfortunately we're in this place where the media is operating entirely off of outrage, and so the narratives we often see around cannabis can be the thing that will make anyone the angriest, and so we become susceptible to narratives like this, utterly false and misrepresenting book that came out in January that many of you might have heard about, that's sort of cherry-picked research and stats and try to imply that weed makes people crazy/violent, which was just a total misrepresentation of what actual scientists were saying. And then all these scientists came out and said, "You're misrepresenting my research," but it was sort of too late because the media had whirlpooled into its own outrage narrative. So I think I've raised more problems and given you no suggestions, but I think that ultimately the most powerful change comes through storytelling and hearts and minds.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. On that note, Madison, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you're doing in the area of psychedelics and what that means to you, but also to maybe describe or discuss a little bit the connection between cannabis, plant medicine, plant-based kind of lifestyle, and where we're at in this particular unique moment.
Wait, can I have my pen? Okay, so a lot of things wrapped up into one. I just wanted. Okay, so where am I starting here? Okay, so I see a lot of connection between a lot of different movements that are happening. Amanda referenced Will and Grace, and I see that cannabis and the LGBTQIA+ movement have a lot of shared history. And right now, I launched a column for Civilized on the intersectionality between queerness and cannabis culture, and my writer, he complained to me about how a lot of companies today will slap a rainbow flag onto something and say that they support the movement, and it's really just capitalizing off something that feels trendy. And while cannabis and the gay rights movement, I think, have a lot of shared history, basically a lot of the people who helped legalize cannabis in California, or medical marijuana in California, came out of San Francisco and were affected by the AIDS crisis. When you know somebody who is affected by the thing that who experiences the thing that you're advocating for, whether they're queer, the cannabis consumer, psychedelic consumer, whatever, that kind of helps change people's minds. But it's not enough to just legalize it or decriminalize it or whatever, but then the industry has to go ahead and really pay homage to the movement. And I don't see that happening as much in cannabis as I'd like to see, and I'm sure also, I don't report so heavily on the LGBTQ, but I think also a lot of people have stuff to say about that. So with regard to other plant medicines, I see, right now psychedelics are where cannabis was maybe 5-10 years ago, and I see cannabis as sort of a gateway crop, I guess you could say, or a gateway plant, in that people are incorporating cannabis into their lifestyle, whether through CBD, through topicals, whether they just smoke flower, whatever, and they're learning that it's just a plant and it helps them and it's not so bad. So now we saw with Denver decriminalizing psilocybin, Oakland is considering decriminalization also. There's tons of research going on at different universities through organizations like MAPS. Really, it's just going to follow, a similar progression. But I think the question that people really should be asking themselves, both with cannabis and in upcoming industries, is really what is the tension between the movement and the industry. So how much can the industry really stay true to its grassroots movement, whether that's literal or figurative or whatever, by ensuring social equity, environmental justice, a whole list of basically things that get lost in a green rush or any sort of capitalistic rush. So.
Thank you. Allison, hi. Thank you so much for being here. Your sister introduced you, but I know it would be probably nice if you could probably say a couple words and introduce yourself, and then I'd love to ask you a question.
Sure. Well, Allison Margolin, I'm an attorney for 17 years this December. Oh, sorry. Is the microphone? My dad's says, yeah? Is that good?
You're good.
Okay. I've been an attorney for 17 years. I knew I was supposed to. That's really loud. I don't know about that. That's all right. Okay, this is better. Thank you. All right. So I knew that it was my calling to do something to end the drug war when I was like 12 years old, and I wrote my first paper on the Medellin cartel. I was just telling the story today about how definitely my dad inspired that, but my mom is the one who took me to get like laser copies of the Medellin cartel at like the printer place, which we had to do back then. And then I wrote it, like my college thesis at Columbia was about actually why I thought at that point the legalization movement hadn't succeeded as well as it should have by that point, which was like 99. And one of the things I wrote about is what's happening now, which is why I think we've had so much progress. And at the time, there was kind of like an idea that medical marijuana should be kind of divorced from the whole criminal justice reform movement, and I always thought that was wrong. And I also thought another aspect is that other interest groups, people say like I'm a marijuana user, I'm a drug user, they would say like I'm disabled or I have cancer, and that's how like politics usually works, where a group identifies itself as the group that's being affected in order to change things. But when the group is so stigmatized, and especially by when the law criminalizes people's just who they are and what they do. There's also that issue that, it's hard to change things when you don't even admit that you do them yourselves. But as the law changes, that also normalizes things and gets people to open up, in their own kind of communities, their families about what they do. And that obviously helps change, I think. And the fact that now we have like our cannabis licensing that is totally joined up with the criminal justice reform movement, and social equity, and I can kind of talk about that. Maybe my question will go about that, but I like to talk about that because I think that it's much more progressive than people think. It's, I think, really awesome in what had to happen in order for this to be successful, and it turned out that was right. So I'm excited about that, and I'm enjoying myself now going from doing mostly defense to like business, transactional, and licensing, lobbying. And it's actually really fun, and we're dealing with a lot of the same clientele, so it's like the same, which is fun also. Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a very sort of big question to ask you, which is, how do you think legalization is going in California right now? And I know you could probably talk for an hour about that, but maybe just a couple minutes.
Yeah.
Just curious as an attorney who's been in the space for a long time.
So I think that Well, first of all, I think the state is doing a pretty awesome job of trying to make sure that there's not gaps between what was the collective model, which, like, we used to do all these cases where we would argue that people were kind of associating collectively. It was this vague kind of model that you could justify, any cannabis crime with. Going from that to licensing, the state first had a deadline that there was the collective defense would expire on January of this year, and then after that you had to be licensed. The problem is that cities like LA, for example, had their deadline moved, like where it was last July. So like at that point, dispensaries who before then, the licensed dispensaries who were just getting marijuana from all these collectives, and by the way, we're growing probably most of the indoor marijuana in California and Los Angeles, maybe the country. So they're able to use have all this good weed on their shelves. As of July, all that got cut off because we didn't start licensing in our city until like September through December. So that kind of created a gap in the market, and then now LA started licensing. But if they kind of had changed that would have kind of helped, I think, the situation we have now where there's not enough good marijuana in the licensed dispensaries and the illegal dispensaries are competing. I think part of the reason is that situation, but the state is trying to do, I think, an excellent effort at it, and the city has also caught up. And I don't think it was the fault of, I think it was two different kind of entities that created that deadline and did the licensing. So, as students, they started doing cannabis licensing in LA. I think that we're doing like one of the most progressive things in the country and maybe the world, where we actually are kind of starting reparations for the first time in a real way. Basically what happened in LA is we had this licensing system where the first non-retail licenses went to people already in the business. So those people got a huge commodity right off the bat. And then we also have the social equity program that gives benefits to low-income people with either marijuana arrests or from areas that are disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. And as you know, first they did like LA zip codes, and now they're going to add Valley zip codes. And then they're going to do something really progressive in LA where like 150 of the licenses are going to go to people who don't even have a property lined up, which means it's going to be like truly social equity. So I think it's pretty awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, Felicia, I see you smiling at that. Do you have any kind of feedback on how things are coming along?
Awesome wouldn't be the word I would necessarily use to describe the social equity program in the city of Los Angeles. A work in progress, a theory being pushed and tested as far as we can go. As one of the organizers that's leading the conversation for a tremendous amount of social equity operators or potential operators in particular, I'm seeing a lot of predatory practices. I'm seeing a lot of deals that are half measures. I'm seeing a lot of people who want me to co-sign things that as a person who loves cannabis, like she's my fair lady, guys. I will fight for her till the death. I love this plant. I'm oftentimes afraid for some of my community members who don't have necessarily the business acumen, that haven't been provided with the technical assistance that's necessary to help them understand the deals that they're negotiating and getting into. So for me, I've seen the complete opposite. I've seen a bunch of people who are wanting to see what opportunity is available to them, but still not knowing what's next, and being paired, or as I was told, to help somebody put a speed dating together for social equity applicants and investors.
I'm doing that myself, but I'm offering free social equity assistance to anybody who doesn't have an investor for both rounds. So like we are doing that, and I've also had people who are social equity candidates making money from their licenses. But it's like an awesome thing. I mean, what I don't really understand. I don't think it's predatory. I like to offer free assistance.
I've seen a lot of predatory practices. Maybe not you personally.
No, I have too.
But
That's why you need a lawyer,
but I
not
know
like
a lot of people
random.
who've offered me a lot of money and asked me if I would sell my soul to go round up my people. And I'm not a poverty pimp, nor am I an individual in particular who will find a bunch of people of color like myself who come from system-impacted communities or come from communities that have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs and just send them to anybody.
No, but if you do it right, and I mean, we're also going to offer, by the way, like information on negotiations.
I'm getting all of the bad stuff, I guess.
Yeah, 50, and they get 51%, and so the next round, and like I would never, and I agree, I've seen predatory things, and I have my clients like paying these random people who are probably going to be indicted, all this money. But
I've been talking to the biggest, largest public relation and government relations firm in the U.S. right now, because their clients who own 1.5 million square feet of the green zone in particular are wanting to speed date with people who I felt is a little predatory for me personally.
Well, I'm happy to teach them what to do.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Amanda.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, please.
Can I just say something? Hello.
Can we turn that mic on?
This seems to work.
Hey, so cool. I just wanted to say something clarifying in case you haven't been following this conversation in more detail other than the conversation you're listening to right now. And just like for clarity's sake, the programs that cities and states are trying to put together to help, quote unquote, help people and communities who have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs create situations where the people who have been disproportionately impacted or come from communities that have been impacted or have a prior criminal record get priority in getting a license to become legal. Once those people are considered priority, other people who have lots of money and who have some kind of institutional backing go after those people and want to put the minorities usually, or someone who has a felony on their record, or in some ways considered someone that we want to give quote unquote priority to, they create that person as a front person, and then you have more corporate, venture capital, private equity, that type of people behind them helping to supply money or resources or space, but then they get the benefit of getting the priority licensing. And a license is the most important thing that you need when you're trying to start a legal cannabis business. So just for clarity, the conversation that we're hearing right now between people who generally share values but are arguing over the logistics over what has been happening is related to the fact that these complex situations are coming up where people Felicia might represent, like a person of color who doesn't have a lot of money in the bank, usually because of long-term systemic problems in the United States that are racially biased, is then partnered with someone else and then perhaps taken advantage of. So just wanted to clarify that was what we were having a conversation about.
And actually on that note, if you want to keep that microphone, I'm curious if in your reporting you've come across social equity programs either in California or in other states that have characteristics that you think are positive, so we can maybe think about some.
There are basically there's like 3 different types of quote unquote social equity legislation that's being pushed in places around the country, and it's the argument over this legislation that has stopped legalization from moving forward in New York and New Jersey because this is such a thorny and complex issue. But I would just say that generally there's multiple threads of legislation. One is about expungement and record clearing, so affecting people who have these past criminal records, and we want those to be automated so that they just happen automatically. It doesn't involve a lot of money and a lot of effort for people to get their records changed. We want something called, or what is fought for among social equity is something called community reinvestment, where taxes from legal cannabis go back into the communities that were disproportionately affected, so you don't need to own a cannabis business to benefit from cannabis's sudden legalization. That could create jobs programs or training programs of all kind. Then we have something called licensing priority, right, where you get this priority licensing, but you don't necessarily need to be attached to these other people that we were talking about before. And then perhaps the most controversial, complex, and honestly problematic aspect of social equity is something called incubation, where essentially a city will create an incentive structure for there to be these sort of forced business partnerships between someone who is an equity applicant, which is usually a person of color, usually someone who maybe has a criminal record, came from an over-policed community,
is then quote unquote incubated by a business that does have enough capital and resources. So sort of making like an aspiring entrepreneur partner with a more established entrepreneur with all of the sort of loaded implications there, like, I'm going to teach you how to run your business, and like, I'm going to put you out as the front man, and we're going to get all this publicity for like quote unquote helping, but are we actually helping? And then some people are being paid off, like, we're going to pay you off to say that you're in the business, but you're not actually going to run a business. And there are so many different complex issues around that. I happened to be in Oregon this past weekend and led a conversation with an equity applicant in Oakland, and a woman who sits on the Cannabis Advisory Board in Massachusetts, who helped write the recreational law in Massachusetts and is an attorney who fought for social equity language to be in that law. We all essentially agreed that incubation in general is not super working, but community reinvestment is something really important. Priority licensing is really important, and expungement and record clearing is also really important.
Thank you so much.
Like just adding to that, I mean, one thing that I think isn't sufficient is, these are communities that for generations have been ravaged by the drug war, and to have a person of color just sitting on your staff or on your licensing applications not enough to really affect the next generation of those communities and going forward. So what I don't really see written into legislation, and perhaps the more legal minds here can correct me, is ways that, they talk about community reinvestment, but so far it seems bleak to me that generation, whoever, the people who are younger than me even, really have much of a chance of getting involved in the cannabis industry and having enough capital to even get started, just based on how much money their parents or their families have, or how much they're coming from, and what kind of starting capital they have. So I think we're seeing a lot of Band-Aid fixes and sort of lip service, but I don't see that we're really having like institutional solutions to the issues that the drug war has already placed upon communities of color.
I'd like to ask a question of Dr. Carrillo. I'm curious, we're talking a lot about California and the United States and very particular issues, but I'm curious about, have you been hearing, like, what's the conversation in Panama, and what does that regulatory and legal structure look like? If you don't mind just taking just 1 or 2 minutes to chat with us about that.
Yes, well, Latin America is a country that's been through a lot of processes. A lot of countries in Latin America, like Colombia, Uruguay, Paraguay, Brazil, Argentina, they're going through the process of legalization, and they already have a few years legal in the market. Panama precisely is one of the first Central America countries that are trying to legalize medical cannabis. It's been a little bit hard because we have a very conservative society, and the main factor in here is the ignorance. I mean, the politicians, the people, they really don't know what is this all about. They don't know the benefits of the cannabis plant, and they still thinking that it's not a good thing. So the main thing right now is been educating even the politicians. I've been the last 2 years talking to them, gathering them. I've been talking with the parliament, with the diplomats, with the Minister of Health, because even in those instances that it's supposed to be the Minister of Health is the one in charge to give access to safe medicines to the patients, to provide health. They really don't understand that the cannabis medicine is a reality, and that people cannot get blind on this reality that is this type of medicine that is this worldwide trend, and everybody and everywhere in the world they're developing research, and so that's one of my main fight, let's say in Panama, because still we have to fight with ignorance. I mean, I don't blame them, because when I started medicine 25 years ago, I didn't know that it was an endocannabinoid system. So even for the doctors, it's hard to realize that this is a reality, and that all the humans being, we were born with an endocannabinoid system, and the plant is given by us for Mother Nature, and that we have in our bodies the endocannabinoids. They are like the ones who are in charge to balance, and they do homeostasis of the body, and it's one of the main systems who runs the balance of the body. So I think it's taking a little bit of time, but I do see from the last year to this year, the people is getting more educated. I'm trying to raise awareness, and I now start seeing the government and the people understanding and studying and looking for answers. They don't have the answers in Panama, but they go and they look in other countries. They come here to the States to treat their children. So for me, it's very frustrating as a doctor, because I have a lot of patients coming to me, asking me, when you have a mother with a child that is having seizures and is begging you that it needs this medicine, and you have to tell them, I'm sorry, it's not legal. So as a mother, I'm a mother, and for me, I will not take a no for an answer. So they just go and get it somewhere else. And these people, they have to just go and get it in the black market. So what I do think is that the government one day don't legalize medical cannabis. They're actually hurting the population, because there's, social media, internet, so people all over the world reads and know that cannabis helps in a numerous amounts of ailments, and there is a lot of scientific evidence. So these patients, they have just to get whatever they can find in the streets, and as a colleague was saying, they sometimes get products that are not good. So they try it, and they have like bad side effects, and then a medicine that is so good for the patient creates a bad reputation, because they say, oh, it didn't work for me, or that's not good, or I didn't feel good. And then because the doctors don't know how to prescribe, the patient is in the dark. They're doing it by themselves. So I do think this is just like a whole approach that every country needs to take, because all the community, the patients, the doctors, the politicians need to be in the same page, because we're talking here about health. And as I said to my country, I said, listen, health doesn't wait. You cannot tell a patient who's dying of cancer in a lot of pain, oh, let's wait until next year, maybe we will legalize. And they will die, and they'll die on pain. And I do believe that this is about human rights. Everybody has the right to die with dignity. Families with children with epilepsy, when the child is controlled, the mother can go to work, it's a kid who can go to school. So we're definitely talking about a big social impact when we have a regulated cannabis in the patient's treatment. So I do think Latin American countries are evolving, and I do think Panama hopefully very soon will have the law for the good of all the patients in the community.
Thank you. And thanks for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, we honor that, definitely.
Thank you.
So I'd like to wrap up the panel and ask each person just to take 1 minute and answer this question, which is, what is something that you've been working on that has been a win for you, that you're excited about and that you'd like to share with everyone? Madison, you want to start? Ooh, putting her on the spot.
Really, I became a journalist because this is what I would be doing anyways. I'm really interested in cannabis. I'm really interested in drug culture, psychedelics, and I see kind of these substances as a way to explore other things like criminal justice, medicine, technology, science, and so forth. So what am I working on? I'm working on just building myself as a writer and a professional in this field. I have a lot of, I guess, projects that I am doing, or stories that I have in the docket. Like I said, I'm excited about this queer cannabis column with Civilized. I also recently was in Israel and do a lot of reporting on the Israeli cannabis scene, and even interviewed Raphael Meshulam, who was the first to isolate THC in 1964. And like I mentioned, Double Blind, which is a magazine on psychedelics, and it's quite new, but I'm very excited to be involved with it. So look out for all of these things. There you go.
Okay. I would be most excited, I think, and we should talk afterward, but I mean, I have clients who were people in the marijuana industry, and, truly social equity people, or people who are basically those kinds of people who made $1 million in the last 3 months. So I do see it happening, and I see other people making money who are in the similar positions, and everyone benefiting. And I do see and of course people are trying to get away with things, but I don't let the people who are operating that are my clients, they're not, I'm not letting them, and I wouldn't let them give the social equity people less than 51%. We're not doing any weird deals, and those people are actually making money. So if you just have honest lawyers, and and people avoid all the, I would say, non-lawyers, who I've heard a lot of them who are trying to do these the predatory practices, they can really benefit. I would say that's the most exciting thing I'm working on right now.
Great, thanks.
I'm working on a story about cannabis and aging that I'm pretty excited about. I think it has sort of really broad-based implications for what we're going to see, not only as baby boomers get older, but the generations behind that. I think that there's so many different things we're going to see changing about the way we relieve pain, and the way that we help ourselves, sleep better, and relieve anxiety and manage, avoiding opioid overuse, etc. So I think that of the stories I'm working on, that's the one I'm very interested in.
Awesome.
Well, for me as a doctor, definitely is to see the patients improve, the patients to live with quality of life, the patients to have, I have a patient that says, I just want 1 day without pain. So when you can provide to a patient that type of relief, it's really, it makes me feel that it's worth it, everything, and I feel proud and happy to see all these people around working together, because we're trying to make the world of a better place through this medicine that instead of harming people, is helping them. And as you were saying, we have many other things like alcohol that hurting people. Cannabis never have any lethalities. Opioids are killing thousands of people a day. So for me, the main thing, and the most grateful, I feel so grateful to be part of this, and that all of us that we are participating in this big movement, we have the opportunity to give a legacy to our children, so to our children, the grandchildren, because this is going to be the future of the medicine. And I'm sure that in 10 years, we're going to discover so many things. That's why I admire all the people, and I encourage the people to keep investing in research, because the main of the excuses the doctors and governments give you is that there's not enough scientific evidence. So when somebody tells me that, I said, there is a lot of evidence, but if you think there's not enough, let's build it. So let's invest in research, and in that way we will feel safer, and we will be able to help more people.
So I actually have done 2 cool things, at least I think 2 cool things. The first, and I'll put on my activist hat for that, We did a report with the UFCW 770, which is a really big union. It's about 57 pages on corporate social responsibility and community reinvestment, where we lay the basic framework in particular so that different municipalities and different people who are having a hard time wrapping their head around not just the need, but what some of the mechanisms look like. We've made that available to people. I'm super proud of being able to be a part of that. The second thing is the social entrepreneur in me. I'm working with an amazing queer-led team that's developed a lip gloss and some cool other beauty products that are going to be hitting the market. And the business infrastructure in terms of what they're doing is social enterprise with a focus on how do we preserve certain LGBTQ values and preserve our community in particular. So those are my two things.
Awesome. Well, thank you, ladies, so very much. Thank you, everyone who participated in this panel with us. Thank you.